So we're good. You're going to tell us when we go live? Are we live? I don't know what that means. Well, I think I may have, I can't tell if I'm on this or not, but at any rate, Mark and Tasha, the most important people here, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Great. Okay, we're good to go. This is this is an instrument flying by instruments, not by sight here. So let me just say welcome to everybody to the 3 C's of Successful Professional Development. This is a webinar that's brought to you by the National Writing Project, and I'm Pat Fox, Associate Director of Site Development here at the National Writing Project, and I will be your moderator on today's webinar. So I want to begin by thanking you all out there for joining us. We're glad to have you. As Joy mentioned, there's a chat feature on the program page, so we hope that you'll be logging in with your thoughts and questions and observations as we go along. So just a couple of other logistics. I wanted to point out that you should notice that the resources that will be mentioned, that you'll hear mentioned, some of which we'll point to directly during today's conversation, are all available as files at the bottom of the page, and they were all supplied by our guests who will take us through some of them, and also be happy to answer any follow-up questions or requests that you might have for additional information or additional resources. And let me also say that when we put these webinars together, we imagine both a live and a later on-demand audience. So you'll notice some of that in the structuring of how we share the material. But I'm also hoping in several cases that folks will want to engage other site leaders at their site, particularly if you're listening to this in the run-up to planning professional development for the coming year. So you should know that this information will stay archived on the webinar website, the video and the chat archive, and all the resources will be available for you to access and send the link to at any point. So let me just situate this moment in this webinar at a moment in the history of our work. The National Writing Project, as those of us who are a part of the work know, has made a priority over our 40-year history of providing high-quality professional development and extending the reach of our programs to serve schools in high-need areas. In the past several years, we've been fortunate to have some of this work funded by Supporting Effective Educator SEED grant from the U.S. Department of Education, and over 100 local sites in more than 35 states have been involved in developing these school and district partnerships and leading year-long embedded professional development programs in high-need middle and elementary and secondary schools, all of which focus on the teaching of writing and as part of challenging career and college and career-ready standards. So we bring you this program at this particular moment as many NWP sites are engaged in school partnerships during the current school year, but there are many others who are also in the process of preparing proposals in response to this latest round of this latest SEED RFP. So we've invited some of our veterans, some of our experienced leaders of this work Mark Dziedzic, who's the director of the Greater Madison Writing Project at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and Tasha Thomas, who's the director of the Spartanburg Writing Project in South Carolina. And Mark and Tasha are both site leaders with broad experience in this work, and we're asking them to share what they've learned both from the seed-supported PD programs, but also from their broader work about the essential elements of school partnerships, partnerships that have, and I want to emphasize successful partnerships. That is, partnerships that have led to a measurable impact on classroom teaching and student performance. So I want to say welcome and thank you to Mark and Tasha for being here.
Thank you for having me, Pat.
Thank you. So at this particular moment, you can imagine colleagues at many NWP sites are in the middle of work similar to the work that you're engaged in, but there are others who are just preparing proposals for working with partner schools and in the coming year, and they're engaged in some of these initial conversations. So we've invited you both here to share what you've learned and what you're still learning, I know, because this work is dynamic and we're learning all the time, but what you're learning about the essential elements of these successful, the most successful professional development partnerships. So I was, as we were preparing for this, and Tasha and Mark and I have had some conversations in the run-up to this, and I'm imagining that there are folks in our audience who would be most curious at this particular moment to hear from you about what they would need to know and what they should be thinking about now in the spring that would lay the foundation for a successful year-long partnership in the coming school year. So with that in mind, I want to turn this over to you, Mark, to ground us in some basic principles that have provided the foundation for your partnership work.
Thank you. So in, excuse me, in doing so and talking about the 3 C's, I just wanted to start off with a little bit of context. I think it's important to understand where some of this comes from, because I think it's really important that we think about who it is we're going to talk to and what we're going to talk to them about and how, but also really important to think when we're going to do these things and what will be our focus. And so in leading up to these conversations, I think it's important that we think about, as much as we can, extending these conversations so that we start them before an RFP for a grant comes out. That we want to be moving along this work because it's the good work, not just because a grant is there for us to do it. And in doing so, that lets us really ground us in the principles of what it is that we want to do. And so the seed work that the Greater Madison Writing Project was involved with last year was in collaboration some with the Fox Valley Writing Project at University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. And through some other work that I had been doing with some teacher inquiry groups with 4 small rural school districts in northern Wisconsin, and then collaborating with Jess Gallo, who was here at UW-Madison at the time as a graduate student, and she was a fellow of the Fox Valley Writing Project. And we've been talking fairly regularly about the idea of how might sites collaborate more together, that we might establish something along the lines of a Wisconsin Writing Project network, and just the importance of doing this and letting educators know that the Writing Project is just more than our individual sites. Excuse me. And so at the same time that Jess and I were talking at Madison, Pat Scanlon, the director of the Fox Valley Writing Project, was in conversations with some of the same school districts that I was working with our teacher inquiry group in northern Wisconsin. And it became one of those nice moments where Pat was talking to one of the directors of instruction who I'd also been working with in a district, and sort of a connect the dots. Everybody knows everybody, and we began talking about how similar this work is that we were talking about doing, and wouldn't it be great if we were able to bring these two programs together. So the Fox Valley was proposing a mini or a shortened rural writing institute with these districts that would take place in summer. The teacher inquiry groups that we were going to be running were academic year programs, both of which were based on Jim Gray's notion of teachers at the center, that teachers are the key to educational reform. And excuse me, in doing so, we kind of thought about these two programs in almost like a Venn diagram look of, we have the Rural Writing Institute on one hand, the teacher inquiry groups on the other hand, and wouldn't it be great if we were able to overlap these two as much as possible to support teachers inquiring into their work during the summer when they had time away from the classroom, and then being able to fully support them as they go into their classrooms to implement their summer work. So that's how these, our work with the inquiry group and the Fox Valley Writing Project really sort of came together, was this trying to blend the best of both worlds, two complementary programs that could really support one another, recruit for one another, and then provide the best possible for the teachers participating, a full year of work together.
So Mark, that's kind of the story of the serendipitous steps that led these programs to connect and kind of offer teachers a year-long arc of an institute followed up by an opportunity to work together in the classroom. But beyond that, what made them such a good fit?
Yeah, thanks. So I think the thing that makes them fit so well together is the grounding in the common vision of teachers at the center. And I think this is something Pat and I have talked about before, about the ability to collaborate between writing project sites, is that there's not as much time that has to go into negotiating a vision between sites, that there's a common understanding of teachers at the center and what that means and how important that is to the work. So the collaboration between the sites was a fairly quick and easy thing. But I think what we both know and realized from the situation was how much of that work has to take place with the districts in terms of conversation around with administrators and teachers as to what does it really mean when we say teachers at the center, and how do we establish that. And so I think that's what has gone into making this a successful collaboration, is thinking about starting there with the district administrators and teachers and working from that point of really developing not what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, but first starting with why do we do what we do, why do we do things the way that we do, and really figuring out that philosophy between the writing project and the districts, and really working that as a co-created and co-developed place, that this isn't us coming in as a straight fee-for-service, please do this thing for us. It's not us coming and saying, this is the way it's going, if you want us to come, this is how it will look, but coming together around discussion that says, what is it that we really believe in? And when we say something like teachers at the center, how do we then bring that about and bring it to life? So
what interested me in my conversations with both you and Tasha, Mark, is that so often I think, and maybe this is just me, but that we jump to content, and when we think about site capacity and the kind of knowledge base that we want to bring to this work, we often think about content, and it's certainly important. Our content knowledge is certainly important, but what you're touching upon here, I think, is and I, for some reason, have these building metaphors in my mind. So I see these as sort of bedrock, foundational kinds of knowledge, which in order to establish these programs, precede or at least co-equal with content knowledge, which is both a knowledge about how to negotiate the kind of mechanical issues of time and access, but also this really deep knowledge about how critical it is to take the time in conversation and collaboration to develop a shared vision and goals and understandings about the work. That's a kind of knowledge that without which this doesn't move forward. And for me, this is you capture this so beautifully in the in a slide that I think you're going to show us about, which really is very densely packed as a way of sharing a process for engaging in conversation that will lead to a shared vision for the work. So we'd love it if you can point us to that in the resources. And Joy, I don't know if Joy may have an opportunity to show that. Otherwise, you can point us to where it is in the resource list, Mark.
So in the resource page, on the pieces down below, the Wisconsin Greater Madison Vision is a PowerPoint there, and there's 2 slides. And I don't know if I click on them, will they pop up for on the page, or?
They'll pop up, I think, on your page.
Okay. Well, they're up on my page at least. So I would invite anybody that is watching this either in live time or in on demand to pop up. And on this slide, there's just 2 simple slides here. The first one, which I've kind of filled in, that we've used in terms of helping us think about what is it that what stage we're at and how we want to approach each stage. Excuse me. And I'd just like to sort of follow up on one of the things that you said, Pat, about sort of being this almost content-free stage of the vision, that it's not necessarily about Common Core state standards or educator effectiveness or data-driven decisions or college and career readiness or whatever else we're putting in there and talking about at any given time, but that what we're really talking about with vision is that bit to talk about what do we believe and why. So if you're able to pull up the slide and take a look at it as I am right now, one of the things I guess I would note is that it looks rather linear here, that we have vision, approach, and program, and that is in my mind how we try to approach things. But we also know that in life it's never really linear, and that these things overlap one another and kind of come back and encroach on one another. But I think overall our goal is to think about which of these is most pertinent to us at the time. And so our early conversations really start with the vision. And so thinking about our purpose there as to really pitch our ideals of teachers at the center. And then we need to do this because administrators are the ones making the decisions about which programs they will involve, support at a district level, really push teachers to be involved in. And in order to do that, we need to be on the same page. We've got to know that we're able to provide the kind of work that they want, and that they want the kind of work that we're able to provide and work with teachers in that way. That we do this through several initial consultations, and I know I shouldn't use the acronym COWS because it seems demeaning, but the Coalition of the Willing. I can't say how important this has been for me to find the people that want to do the kind of work that we want to do, that's the bedrock of the National Writing Project. And so this is sometimes some very informal conversations, and I think a key to this is that these can begin without an RFP for a grant. There's no reason we can't start these conversations early so that when it does come time to for an RFP, that we know districts that are and administrators that are already interested in working with us and the way that we know it needs to be done. So moving on from vision, once we've worked with and really kind of sort of come to some consensus, hopefully, with the districts around how, sort of why we do the work we do and that it's something that they're interested in, is then going into the approach. And this, for us, is where we really begin to hopefully model this idea of co-creation, co-planning, and inquiry as the basis for all the work that we do. And so in identifying needs and shared interests, that's really what we're trying to do here. Excuse me. And so this is something that we want to approach with districts, that we look at needs assessment as a way to model inquiry and go into looking at the needs of the districts and the teachers. And this is really the point at which it's extra key, I guess, if that's no better way of saying it, to really make sure we bring in teachers at this point, that we cannot start building around an approach to professional development that we say is based on teachers at the center without having teachers as a central part of that conversation. So, and after this is all sort of comes together, this is when we move on to that conversation of how do we actually do it. And so we bring together and start working on a purpose for the program and developing what it looks like, how we're going to do this, co-developing this with administration and with teachers in mind and with them together, so that we're being sure we're staying true to sort of a vision and an approach that we've already discussed and come to a consensus on, that our work aligns to that which we've said we wanted to do. And then we build our programming from there. And of course you'll hear from Tasha more about that. Once we build program, this doesn't mean that it's done or that consensus building is completed, that's an ongoing, that program development continues, right up through the very end of it. But in terms of our work, this is kind of what we're thinking, this is what we think of when we go into initiate these conversations.
So, and I just want to point to the fact that you have handily included, along with this slide, a blank, just a template, so that if folks wanted to gather their leaders who will be engaged in doing this work at their own sites, they could imagine how to, play with that and, see to what extent it's useful to them in engaging in this same kind of foundational work, or whether they can pull some ideas from it and modify it for their own purposes. I wonder, just because we got started a little bit late, I think maybe we want to see if folks who are listening to this on demand, who will have the facility to stop, and if they might imagine taking a couple of minutes at this point to look a little bit more closely at your initial slide, and then play around and do some of this workshopping with it on their own. This would be kind of a good time for them to stop. But for the moment, we're probably going to have to move through, and we'll see if we have any time left at the end. But so Mark, what impresses me about this is how much work is in the front end. How extensive and inclusive and broad and deep these ground-laying, partnership building conversations are. Is there any way to kind of quantify that? I mean, how many meetings, what kinds of meetings? I know you sometimes, because these are rural districts that are spread out, Do you do Google Hangouts, or do you Skype, or do you actually go face to face to engage in these critical opening conversations?
We tend to do some of all of them because it is, it's rather extensive, and we can't make the trip up there all the time. But it is one of those things that I think face-to-face meetings are extremely important, and I can't imagine doing this work without face-to-face meetings. Google Hangout is great. I love Skype. We use GoToMeeting. We have a variety of ways that we can communicate between buildings and sites and other places. But there's something, at least personally, I find really different about being in that same room, to be able to have 2 hours of dedicated time to just sit and talk and really hash out all the who, what, when, where, why of what we believe in and what we want to do. Excuse me. And I think it's the same thing. Every one of the teachers in our summer institutes and our PD would probably say about their classroom is that they know it's super important to develop that community in their classroom for the year if they're going to have a successful year. But it's hard, it's hard to take the time up front because you want to get going on things. But we know how important it is and how necessary it is. So, yeah, the Skype, Google Hangouts, but I don't think it's I would ever discount the importance of face-to-face meetings.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or the importance of all of this community building and vision, common vision creating. So I'm wondering at this point, do you want to just tell us a little bit about how this continues? And we may have a chance to come back to this later on, but a little bit about how you carry this notion of co-creation, how that's embedded in the year-long work after these initial conversations.
Yeah, I'll try and keep this one short so we can keep it going. But I think the co-creation is, it's not only at the program level, but it's also this ongoing piece that we develop an approach that we're going to use and a program and an idea of where we're going, and then with the teachers, we continually negotiate where we're at and where we're going to continue going and how we'll get there. So. One of the things that we've talked a lot about at our writing project site is this idea of direction, not directions. That we're really working on. If we're really truly working from an inquiry and a teachers at the center approach, that working together in a particular direction is useful. Us giving lots of directions is not useful, nor is it in line with a teachers at the center and an inquiry approach. So we try and place our work there really in this spot of working with teachers on authentic intellectual questions that they have about their classroom, about their students, about their instruction, and continually come back to that over and over and over from the very get-go to the very end. And so I included a couple documents in which we use in terms of our writing with our year-long programming, sort of our starting points documents to really think about. We begin this work and looking at what it is in each of our classrooms that's important to us, and continuing to move on from there. One of the things that the seed work gave us a great opportunity to do was have teachers spend 2 full weeks with the Rural Writing Institute, really diving into their practice without having kids in front of them, to really have that professional time to really just dive into it. And then for us to jump in at that point and work with teachers to say, now that you do have the kids, what does it really mean for you? And I don't know how to emphasize enough that I think this is so different from a typical in-service approach of that we don't have a binder. We're not checking for fidelity of implementation. We're not telling somebody how to use a particular curriculum, but that it's based on each teacher's experience. And as much as it pains me to say it, I don't. That's not their everyday experience all the time. And so it's important that not only do we reiterate this through our words, but that through our actions, our writing prompts, our right into each session, that we use that writing as a time to learn, not just communicate with one another. That we come back and our activities are with teachers at the center and not somebody up there telling them what to do, but helping them think about their work and helping them find ways to engage with one another. And so I'll stop there.
No, that's fine. What I just wanted to point to is if we have time at the end, of course they're there for you to access at any point, but Mark has shared two resources. One is a starting points activity, and one is a kind of invitation to teachers engaged in the year-long teacher inquiry to do a little writing exploration of their philosophy. And so if we have time at the end, we'll dig into those a little bit. But for the moment, I want to say thank you, Mark, for giving us a lot to think of and building a firm foundation for our conversation, and turn this over to Tasha, who I think will have found many points in what Mark has been saying that really connect directly to your own work. So thank you, Tasha, and welcome.
Thank you, Pat. Well, definitely all of the principles that Mark sort of described and iterated, they value at the Wisconsin Writing Project. We also adhere to those principles, and this idea of teachers at the center is really at the heart of laying the foundation for our partnerships at the Spartanburg Writing Project. We've been working with individual schools and our 8 local school districts for about 12 years now. So our processes and our tools have sort of evolved over that time. And this idea of collaboration and co-creation, the inquiry-driven model is really what we've tried to build on over that span of 10 years. In looking at developing a shared vision, we also have several of those informal conversations, both with administration as well as with teachers. And in many cases, it's TCs who actually initiate the partnership in knowing the work that we do and wanting to become more involved with that work, but also wanting to share what they've learned through our programs with the rest of their colleagues at their school and district. So one of the I guess, initial tools that we use to gauge investment and interest in working with our writing project site is the school and district partnership application, which is basically a way for schools to share their needs, their goals, and to tell us a little bit more about their demographics. And it's a way for our site leadership to really assess the level of interest and the level of investment that the school is willing to provide. So I've shared in the webinar resources that particular application. It's actually the PDF. And the last page in that file contains a sort of evaluation form or rubric, if you will, that we use initially to assess the values and the principles that school has shared with us via that application. And so really what we do is we want to ensure that partnership requests are sort of a grassroots effort, that they aren't simply administrative mandates. We realize the importance of having the full support of the administration, but typically we request that a team of teachers along with administration create the partnership application. And in reviewing it, those of us on the leadership team really look for the connections to research. We look for teacher investment in terms of teaching reading and writing at the school. We want to make sure that the goals are commensurate with our own principles. And we use this instrument, the evaluation form or rubric, if you will, to gauge that, to make sure that before we even embark on the journey of developing a shared vision, that we do have those shared principles as the foundation for our relationship. And you can sort of see, we just developed a very simple Likert scale. And again, this form has sort of evolved over the years, but we use it really as an assessment tool. And we've tried to highlight elements and dispositions that we believe are essential for a successful school partnership. Our goal is really to make sure that the professional development takes hold and that it definitely affects classroom practice and eventually student achievement. So we ask in the application that the school share any connections that might be relevant to action research. We ask that they discuss what the current approach to writing instruction is, and using that evaluation form, we're able to gauge the willingness of both the faculty and the administration to really support the partnership, to devote time and resources to developing new strategies, new approaches, and possibly even working with those that are already in the school. And so this evaluation and the application itself is our first reflective tool, and it informs both the potential partner of what we're looking for, because of course they have a copy of the form as they're creating the application, so they see what we're looking for in a potential partnership, but it also allows us the opportunity to sort of assess, or maybe pre-assess, if you will, where the school stands in relation to our principles and practices.
I'm just wondering if everybody has had a few minutes to look at that particular document, and we do have some folks who are active in the chat room. If they had any questions about that, we'll ask Tasha to continue, but we can always come back and look at that together. So, I mean, it's interesting to me how that sort of lays out your ideal partner, right? It's
exactly.
I mean, it's not online dating, but in a sense, it's the, you know, what I'm looking for in a mate in terms of this kind of partnership, and it really lays out very very clearly what the qualities of, you know, the best partner are. Can you just say a second before we move on, just a little bit about how you came to that? How did you come to that particular rubric? I mean,
Sure.
It's one of those things that's obvious in retrospect.
It is, and we actually, like I said earlier, this instrument sort of evolved over time. We started prior to my involvement with the Spartanburg Writing Project, working with maybe 1 or 2 schools per year, and then making sure that we reflected on the effect. Was that partnership effective, and if so, how? And so as a team, at any given moment, there are between 12 and 15 members of our leadership team, and so through several planning retreats, we just sort of talked through, what are we looking for in a mate, so to speak? What do we want our partner schools to provide and to contribute? And we wanted to make sure that it was a true collaboration, and also that the partnerships were initiated by teachers and teacher consultants, because we really felt like that was the only way to have buy-in, that we knew we needed support of the administration, but even more than that, we valued input from the ground up, so to speak, so that we knew teachers would be invested and would value the work that we were doing. And so basically we looked at some of our early partnerships, and we thought about what would we change from those partnerships, and then looking at, you know, what worked well and what would we keep, but also what would we do differently, what would we want the school and the faculty to do differently. And so this document sort of emerged from those conversations. both with the leadership team members and with teachers who had participated in the partnership.
So it's really a kind of rich distillation of years of experience and many minds collaborating on, you know, the work and the qualities necessary for success. It's a great piece of a great artifact of many layers and many years of smart work. I wonder if I can ask you to say a little bit more about what happens beyond this initial application process, which is so much more than an application process, in terms of how the work unfolds over the course of the year. And I know you've talked about the notion of the participants as co-planners in this, and I wonder what that looks like.
Definitely, we want the participants to be invested in the partnership, and I wanted to touch back on what Mark mentioned in terms of teachers at the center, teachers as co-creators of the professional development. I think a lot of times we get so caught up in content and method of delivery that we overlook the need to constantly monitor and adjust and modify and revise the vision, because often what we set out to accomplish, sometimes we have to change direction, either early in the partnership or maybe sometimes even later. But after we form these relationships and that initial sort of vision is established, we set some goals, and we really try to constantly get feedback from the teachers involved in the partnership, because we feel like we want to know as professional development providers if what we are delivering is useful and relevant, but we also want to make sure that we're addressing immediate needs and that the resources that we're sharing through our discussions, whether they're planning meetings or in-service workshops, that the teachers really are applying those in the classroom, and of course, you know, using those to inform their practices. So I shared a file marked in the webinar resources marked South Carolina Spartanburg Seed PD link, and within that document there are links to several of the tools that we use for gathering feedback and assessing where teachers are, and of course you go back to the idea that as teachers we try to meet students where they are. We really try to meet teachers where they are, and we try our best not to make any assumptions in terms of, are these teachers implementing workshop model already, you know, in terms of how much do they adhere to principles of best practice. We try to avoid any assumptions. And so there's a link in that document that will, I believe is entitled Initial Teacher Survey. And basically what we do is customize an initial pre-partnership survey that we ask all the faculty members involved in the partnership to participate in. And again, there are a variety of ways we can customize the survey, but basically we ask teachers to assess their own strengths in the classroom. We ask them to assess areas in which they would like to grow. We ask for areas of student need, both in reading and writing. We ask for specific topics that teachers would be interested in researching and exploring. So the survey really is much like a pre-test might be in your classroom. The survey is our first specific look at where the teachers are. And so we use that tool to develop that shared vision, so to speak, and the results of that survey, we use that to develop the content and the approach for the partnership. Whether maybe we're developing a graduate course, that survey might be used to inform the syllabus that we develop, or it might be used to develop ongoing in-service workshops. So I feel like that's one of our most valuable tools because it allows us to get feedback from individual teachers and participants in the professional development partnership, and then to use that information to really design the professional development itself. And then we also ask teachers early in the partnership, once we sort of started building community with them, we set up a blog, and we ask teachers to use that blog as a reflective and ongoing reflective tool having conversations digitally. But we asked them to identify an instructional roadblock, and occasionally multiple roadblocks, but basically to examine their practice and try to identify some areas of challenge. Again, going back to those areas of growth that we also asked them about on the survey, but by having them write about the instructional roadblock in more of a narrative form, we really begin to get to know the individual teachers and the challenges that face them on a daily basis in the classroom. So using the blog, we're able to look at what their most immediate needs are, which topics, which areas they would like to focus on. And so, for example, with our current SEED professional development in a high-need school at Chapman Elementary School, we learned through the blog post, through this instructional roadblock exercise, that many teachers were concerned with developing integrated units to address college and career readiness standards, that they wanted to learn more about implementing effective workshop models, not just in writing but also in reading and in the content areas. And they really wanted to learn more about effective assessment and how to use that assessment to drive their instruction. And had we not asked them to write about their instructional roadblocks, we may not have been able to sort of zero in on those specific areas and to know that what the professional development we were delivering would be useful and relevant to what's currently happening at the school.
And so you shifted your focus. You know, you threw out any preliminary plan you had for the next session, and you focused on what they had targeted. And you said you were, as it turns out, right after you got some of that feedback, you were processing a session that you had participated in at the annual meeting in Boston.
Yes.
That was, or on the idea of positive positive feedback for students. You want to say a little bit about that?
Yes, and that sort of refers to another feedback tool that we use. In the initial blog post and instructional roadblock descriptions, we sort of create this big picture for the content and the approach that we're going to take with the partnership. But then on a weekly or monthly basis, we also want to get that continual feedback from teachers. And we selected Chris Tavani's latest book, So What Do They Really Know, as our professional reading for this particular partnership because of the request that we examine assessment and how that assessment informs our instruction. And in that book, she shares a method that she uses with her reading students called a conversation calendar. So I've included 2 versions of that calendar in the webinar resources, but it basically comes straight from Chris Tavani's work. And we decided to use this tool as a way for sort of this ongoing dialogue to happen, but we wanted teachers to have a tool readily available at their desk during the week, some place that they could quickly jot down reflections or questions or aha moments. If something happened in the class that day, we wanted them to have a place to jot it down. But then we also, as professional development providers, wanted to give feedback or suggestions or encouragement to respond to what they had written down. So you have a blank version of that conversation calendar to which you can refer. And then there's also a sample where you will see a teacher's notes and then the response of the professional development provider to sort of give you an example of what that might look like once it has been completed. And Pat, the situation you were referring to, originally with our current partnership at Chapman Elementary School, we had planned in December to examine writing to learn strategies. Because we are focusing on developing integrated units with content literacy, we had thought, well, we'll share strategies for note-taking. We'll all examine, different ways for encouraging literacy across the curriculum. But the feedback we received in November was that actually giving feedback, teachers did not feel confident giving feedback on their student work. They felt like they weren't noticing adequate student growth in writing and in other areas because they weren't giving effective feedback to the students. And we really feel at the Spartanburg Writing Project that that is one of the necessities of a writing workshop or any workshop model, is that students have time to work, that they have choice in the work, and then the other necessity is that they get feedback in a timely manner. So I had participated in November in a session was actually at NCTE, but it was specifically on giving positive feedback and enabling students to grow as learners via that feedback. And so we just decided not to discuss writing to learn strategies in December based on the exit slips and the conversation calendars from the November work. We completely changed our focus for December and decided instead to share strategies for positive feedback. And it was really serendipitous because I had all these great new strategies from Carl Anderson and others who led the panel at NCTE. It was also great because the teachers were able to immediately apply the work we did in December. And we're now seeing the effects of that. We're seeing the positive effects with student performance. And had we not seen the partnership as malleable in some respects, had we not been flexible enough, had we not wanted to make sure that we were using the feedback to inform our own practice, we may have missed an opportune teachable moment, so to speak. But the teachers saw that we made that change, and they appreciated that we were invested in their growth as much as the overall partnership. So
and of course, that's a lesson to take back to their classrooms to to be in touch with their students and see what their students need next.
Exactly.
Thank you. That was that's wonderful, and obviously there's much more to say and much more to share than we will have time for. But let me just say that. Mark and Tasha both, if you think of some additional resources that are connected to this work, if you send them along, I can add them as files to the webinar homepage. But in the few minutes that we have, I wanted to bring Mark back in and ask both of you that. Because as I said in the beginning, I'm imagining that some of the folks who are listening and will be accessing this on demand are at these early stages of thinking about this work. And obviously, you've both been involved in the work and develop these understandings and processes over a long period of time. But I'd like you to step back for a minute and imagine that you're just starting out and that you're beginning to do the foundational work of negotiating and establishing a year-long intensive professional development relationship with a partner school. Can you pull from what you've thought about and what you've said and what you've heard each other say, what principles and lessons you'd want to keep at the forefront of your thinking, kind of the post-it note to self as you embark on the early stages of a new partnership? And either one of you, I guess, can jump in on this.
Well, I jump in real quick and say that I think the partnership application is just a genius idea. I just think that's such a great way to start. That really puts that out there for districts to really put on the table what it is that they believe and why they believe and how they want to approach the work. And one of the things I guess I'd say is that this is the good work. But just because we start the good work doesn't mean that it's going to continue in the same way that it is happening. That people change, and I don't mean the people in positions change, not so much the people change. And as that happens, I just think it's so important that we continue to nurture the relationships and the work that we have going and want to continue to keep going. That the same way that we that Tasha was talking about listening to the needs of the teachers. As people involved in the work change, we've got to be sure to continue those conversations about that started as co-planning, co-created with administrators and teachers, and continue to keep that together so that we can be sure that the work does stay to keep going.
And renegotiate where significant renegotiation is called for.
As people making decisions change, then priorities change, and we have to figure out is the question about, is inquiry an approach that's going to continue to be supported, and if not, how does a writing project respond to that? Are there what are those foundational principles that were established at the beginning? How do you maintain those when things change and people who were not part of that negotiation are now brought into the conversation?
Which I think is a condition that many site leaders involved in this work will recognize as a challenge, as almost a predictable challenge that comes up, is some of the key players will change, and you're starting the conversation anew with each of them. So I think we're out of time, which is just amazing to me. We had so much more to say and so much more to share. So maybe there may need to be a part 2 at some point down the road. But I want, before we lose you, both those of you who are there in real life and those who are listening in the future on demand, it would be a great help to us if you would fill in the exit slip, which is the link to which you'll find on the webinar homepage. We certainly appreciate your being here. I hope you'll be in touch with any follow-up information and insights. I really want to thank you, Mark, and you, Tasha, for sharing some really brilliant insights that I think are built on just a foundation of very, very thoughtful work that that does us all proud. Really, really wonderful. So thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you the next time.
Thank you, Pat.
Thank you. Bye-bye.